Hi, everyone. My name is Harald Hutter. I'm the chair of the GBFA at the Paris College of Art. The Global Bachelor in Film Art is a joint degree run by the Paris College of Art and Emerson College in Boston. Um, we are having our first annual Industry Talk, a new frontier in virtual production. We will be joined by Emerson faculty, Harlan Bosmajian, who teaches at the VMA as a cinematographer. Our guests today are Mitch Nekoroski, who works in production and videography at Fox Entertainment. We're also joined by Jake M. Block, who's a creative director and videographer working at Jake M. Block Productions. Arlen, Jake, feel free to switch on your videos and your audio as well.
Hey everybody, good to meet you.
Hey everyone,
Howdy.
nice to see you.
So just a brief rundown. Harlan, Mitch, and Jake will be sort of introducing themselves briefly, and then we'll go through some of the sort of so any sort of introductions to what it means, what virtual production means. Afterwards, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A chat. So you can start posting those questions as you think about them. Corey, who's working backstage, will be sort of moderating the questions and putting the questions forward to Harlan, Mitch, and Jake. So with further ado, please welcome our guests. Thank you very much for being here. Yeah, Harlan, maybe you want to say a few words about yourself before we...
Sure, thanks, Harlan. So I'm Harlan Bosmajian. I've been teaching at Emerson College, teaching cinematography and film production for the last 14 years, and have been working as a director of photography on over 30 features and TV shows, and uh, worked on the show Mad Men for a while, and worked on indie feature films of all different types of budgets, from like $50,000 to 5 million. And I'm just really excited to learn about how we're going to start using this new technology more and more.
I'm Mitch. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us. That's great. Thanks for donating that time. Yeah, I excited to be here. I've worked for Fox Entertainment for a few years now. Basically post-COVID, we've been building up for the last 2 years now, XR facility, kind of in, I would say, the first generation of these that are in the more broad, I would say second generation actually, of these facilities. And it's been really fun. We've shot for 4 months on it now, at various stages of progression. So really excited to, speak to you guys today about sort of what that's been like and what the state of the industry is and where it's going to go.
Hello, but maybe not the best, but hopefully some of the most interesting.
You could say that.
Hi, I'm Jake, Emerson grad, 17. Over the last couple of years, I've done many things, but I started my base interest in new media exploration. So I worked at Amazon to build the initial suite of VR and AR IP, which was really fun, and then went full head first into the world of production for VR. Also, along the way, helped do the first six-figure deal for distribution for a VR film called Spheres, which was a lot of fun. Now I'm a supervising producer at HubSpot Media, and there I do everything in new media. Right now I'm building ways to gather leads for the business. But in my personal practice, I explore AR and VR, and my work has been seen at places like South by Southwest, and also in Miami. So yeah, super excited to jump in with everyone on this.
All right. Thanks, Jake, Mitch. So I'm just thinking let's start kind of at the beginning. And you know, I hear so many different terms kind of passed around now when people talk about this technology, about virtual production. Like, what are some of the differences of the technology? There's things like virtual reality, augmented reality, VR production. Like,
Yeah.
what are these different compartments?
Yeah, there are very specific definitions actually for all of those terms that I've every vendor that comes in is very careful about which terms are which. But I would say generally speaking, when referring to at least virtual production in terms of a volume, you refer to the wall, the LED wall, as a volume, and the practice as XR production. That is different than AR production, which consists of taking reality and augmenting virtual aspects on top of that reality. And virtual reality is, it's constructing a full virtual environment that you are immersed in. This is XR, which is, I guess, cross reality production, which is, you're using a virtual background, but you're also simulating immersion and using a lot of people, there's different ways to do that. There's just using the screen, the background, using an Unreal Engine environment, and then doing immersion, parallax, with the tracked camera. But then there is what a lot of people like to call 2.5D, which basically is taking the wall, but then taking a practical element in the foreground, which would involve something like, getting a big Roman column in front of you, so that when the camera crosses, you say, oh, that's a real column. Whatever's behind that guy must also be real.
I think as well, just to add, we kind of think of XR production as like the synergy between traditional filmmaking and kind of the innovation that's come out of the AR and VR space. These things are different, but the technology is used across. So we think of an engine as the thing that's powering the screen behind our talent. So traditionally, in a green screen environment, you would bring people into studio and you would set them up and you would light them and you would light the screen in the background so you could perfectly remove it. But in XR production, the green screen is not there. It is a screen, very close to a TV screen. But the magic comes with the actual track that you get from the perspective of the camera. And the technology that has allowed that to happen has come from all of these different places. So when I think of mixed reality, the exciting thing is that although mixed reality is really the most real version, the most tactile version of production when it comes to this new innovative technology, it takes from all of these other places in interesting and kind of revolutionary ways.
Okay. And just to lock down these terms, so you have the LED wall, which is called the volume. You have XR, which is the virtual environment that is being created.
Yep.
And then the engine does that refer to like the hard drives or something? Like what is that
Right.
actually referring to?
So I would say actually you've really touched on accidentally here. It's tough because this is basically the most zoomed out you can get on the topic, right? But I think that a big issue that I actually interact with a lot day to day is that a lot of these terms do, like when we have multiple vendors coming in discussing routing, the amount of time it takes people to agree on terms is astounding actually, because yes, engine refers to both Unreal Engine and the render nodes that are powering that engine, right? So it's it's both the computer that is running the wall and the thing in the wall itself. And obviously engine can refer to a million different things and processing, because keep in mind, when you're talking about, you know, a volume production versus like virtual reality where you are just running, you know, the processor on a headset or, you know, in your computer or whatever. If you're talking about a volume, you're talking about camera, you know, frame rates, you're talking about the wall's refresh rate, you're talking about, you know, that feeding out its signal, syncing with the camera, going back into the machine, pulling out, you know, whatever image you're feeding into it, putting that on. So there's so many steps, so many of those can share names. So it's tough to nail down exact names for all these things, because a lot of the times I find that we're in kind of a stage right now where it can be amorphous. You could get a team that's referring to one thing as an engine, and then the next team comes in and they're like, that we have an engine. What do you mean? You know?
When I refer to engine,
Yes.
I refer to it as the thing that is creating the content that's on the screen behind our talent. So when I say that, in this XR production world, the magic of it comes from many places actually, but one of the main places is what the engine is providing. And what we say with an engine is a game engine. So something that is running a dynamic simulation of an environment. And when I say dynamic, I mean like a game. Like if you think about it as like, let's let's think of it like The Sims, just because it's like the most basic thing. I think everybody can understand what The Sims looks like. But fundamentally, what you can do in The Sims is place a person, place furniture, change the time of day. You can do all of those things in Unreal Engine. And that's what allows you to have such a dynamic screen behind you, a dynamic environment that's believable. So in the engine itself, you have a lot of power to create these environments that can help you tell your story in the best possible way, and then also move as fast as possible. That's one of the like true benefits of XR production. Instead of having to do big company moves where you're shooting in one location, and then to get like the side of the mountain that you want, you have to go, but you're 20 minutes late and you miss sunset. You don't have to worry about that in the same way, because you're in studio and you can very simply just change the environment that the engine is running.
I think
Now, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that depending on whether you want to continue to discuss this at a zoomed out level, I think that would dovetail nicely into sort of discussions of background and sort of what you actually put in the background here, because I think that we're getting into a lot of video game backgrounds, and that is not the only thing that you could put behind a subject here. So I know Jake and I both have a lot of experience with like photogrammetry. One thing that I'm sure I could share today is that, you know, people like to LiDAR scan things here, and basically it's like, let's say you have you're doing your full day on set, and you are, you know, you have a week, and you have your production budget, you have your rentals, your crew, everything going on. You're losing your light, you have your sunset scene and an hour to shoot it, right? You get through those days, you can do one of two things. You can LiDAR scan, you know, your whole environment, and then basically use that, you know, photogrammetry capture as a 3D environment that you can then use on the wall, or you could take a 360 video plate and also put that on the wall. I actually, if you'll allow me to share my screen here, I have a little slideshow. And so this project here, I'll describe what he's also describing right now, is basically that they took a scene here, and basically what it is a scene shot in a park at golden hour. So it was like between like 5 and 6 p.m. here. And obviously when you're shooting a golden hour, it's the best lighting you could have in production, but obviously it's one of the hardest to maintain. But you know, you take it into virtual and you can shoot all day. So what they did here was they shot for an hour out in a field and captured as much as they could. And basically they took all this footage, and then they you know, stopped, cut, rolling, put down a 360 camera, took a plate of the environment, and then they went to a VR, an XR studio, sorry, and they used image-based lighting, which is basically you take the 360 video or any 3D environment, and you basically tell a light and say, hey, you're acting as the reverse of this shot, and say, like, you're what's behind me, right? And then it will cast that light onto the subject in order to match what's in that scene. So this is actually super crucial. I'll get more into this later, but this is a very, very key part of immersion in these. And it's actually the sign of what is, I think, personally good XR versus bad XR. And basically they took that, they shot this here for a full day on the volume, and then they handed both cuts to the editor and said, hey, take whatever shot looks best. And I think that is one of my favorite implementations of the thing, because it really proves that you can use this to save yourself a ton of time, stress, money. You know, I mean, if you have talent, sometimes they can't show up on the day you want, and they can just show up when they can. And, you know, it's this kind of thing. It really, really saves you, gets you out of a pinch if you can, you know, give yourself the backstop of putting down a 360 camera before you leave set that day.
And so, Mitch, when you're filming the shots of the park,
Mhm.
right? The shots of the park. What kind of camera are you using for that? Are you, like, if I shot the rest of my movie with a Arri Alexa,
Right.
would I be shooting that stuff in the park with no actors there with the Arri Alexa, or is there some special camera that you need for that?
For the stage itself? So that is a good question, actually. And basically so it's interesting, right? Because these are sort of hybrid stage spaces where you could do broadcast type like filming, or you could do cinematic filming. So actually what's sitting on we have Venice 2s sitting on broadcast pedestals in our studio. So it's like this really weird mix of broadcast production and cinematic production. So you can, yeah, basically you can match whatever you have shot on the field. Obviously, you know, color matching becomes its own headache, because you have to make sure the panels are, you know, can color match your scene. And then, you know, do you shoot in log, or are you shooting with a baked in LUT kind of thing? And so it could get very complicated very quick with color matching specifically. But the basics of it are, yes, you shoot with the same equipment that you shoot in the studio with. Yeah.
And I think the other piece of that is, like, when you're actually practically on set, when you're in the park, for example, and you're shooting your scene, and in Mitch's example, he shared that in the scene, like, they had a time limit, right? So they shot as much as they could. And when they were done shooting, they basically took what we call a plate, which is a scene with nobody in it. But how we use that plate is actually not as a 2D image. Rather, it's a 360 image, and you can capture a 360 image almost kind of any way now. You could use a cell phone to capture a 360 image, which is great for people that don't have access to 360 cameras. I know specifically on this call, Dan and I have had a lot of fun with 360 cameras, but it comes with a whole host of issues when you use them. But fundamentally, when you take a 360 capture, the interesting thing and what you can use that for is, when you bring it into studio, you use it in a way that's very similar to an HDRI, which is something you use in 3D. So in a 3D program, an HDRI is just basically a plate that takes the lighting information from a scene and then turns it into digital information that will light the scene accurately to the actual environment that you're putting into the 3D engine. So you basically are doing the exact same thing, except instead of using a 3D engine with that 360 piece, you're doing it in a volumetric studio, a studio with the LED wall in the background. And when you use the HDRI, it actually directly correlates with the lighting inside of your closed box studio.
And so, when you say 360 capture, what is that referring? What am I capturing with?
So once again, like, a 360 capture can be captured in many different ways, but like a 360 capture is essentially a image where right now in film you shoot 16:9, right? It's a rectangular image, and for a 360 capture, it basically takes the entire environment all the way around you and then turns it into an equirectangular image. So it actually projects it like a map. You know how a map is 2D, but obviously, I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully, we have the right people.
Let's not get into
call,
that.
but a map is flat, right? The Earth is a sphere, and in the same way that you create a 360 image, a 360 image to a user, that it comes out flat, but a 3D program can interpret it as a sphere. And instead of viewing it as a sphere, you're actually viewing it inside the sphere. So you're able to look in every single direction, and the lights that are baked into that image, whether it be the sun, how the shadows are reflecting off of the trees, that information is turned into practical lighting information that we can actually bring into those studios to actually create that level of immersion. Now I'm intruding on something that Mitch wanted to talk about, though, so I'm going to step back.
I would also say for actual practical capture of that scene, like Insta360 is a $400 camera. It handles its own stitching, which is the connection of those images, because there is no camera currently that has a lens that can capture 360 degrees of image. So it at least it takes two. It basically has two spheres on either side, and it takes that and auto stitches it for you. Very simple. You could put that out for, like probably, I would say like 5 minutes to be safe. And then basically you could use that plate because I think that captures like 8K. So you could, any 16:9 version of that image, you could turn it, in any direction. You could get your coverage this way, and then the reverse shot over the shoulder of the other person, you just flip your scene. And then you have your actors switch positions, and then you're back on the other side, right?
And we're using the image from that 360 camera.
Yes, exactly. And actually the best practices with volumes is that you keep everything the background a little soft focus, because if it's fully in focus, then you kind of start to see the fakeness. And that's actually a really easy way to identify when a production is using a volume now. And you'll see that a lot is just that soft focus on the background. And yeah, that it definitely helps sort of bring that immersion in, but it definitely has a little bit of that DSLR look where it's a little shallow.
Because you want to match the depth of field of the lens.
Right, but also you are in a way shooting through a screen, right? So what happens a lot is with these stages is that you are shooting, basically you're trying to immerse the subject. So you're saying, hey, like I don't want to see the LEDs on the LED wall. And actually here, I'll show you another thing.
I think, as Mitch brings it up, the cool thing with this technology is that all of it is the worst it will ever be, right?
Yeah.
So fundamentally, you are dealing with a screen, but as we've all seen, as technology has progressed, like the Retina display on an iPhone is truly something that your eye cannot tell the difference of between reality and a screen. And these screens right now that are in these volume studios, although they're like pretty expensive, very cutting edge, bleeding edge pieces of technology, it takes a lot of engineering and power to power such small pixel density, such tight pixel density.
Yes.
So by being softer, you are totally eliminating the need to worry. You're basically making sure that when you're pointing the camera at the screen, you're not seeing the individual pixels of the screen.
Right. And if you've ever, taken your iPhone and tried to record your own computer screen, you'll notice artifacting, you'll notice moire, you'll notice all these issues. And that is also something that like you can really avoid by keeping the soft focus here. And as you can see in this picture, this is our volume setting up for an event here. And the background there it's 4K, and essentially it's just a big Jumbotron, right? So yeah, if you put your nose right up against that, and that's Miranda, she's actually an Emerson student right now. Miranda, I'm sorry if you're in here. But she basically, like, yeah, you look at the LEDs here, you put your nose right up against it, you'll see the individual pixels. But let's say we shoot by that basically at the third row of chairs in this frame, and you want to keep the subject as forward on the wall as possible. You want to remove them, and then backlighting is the biggest key to these things, because almost every single time we get a DP in the space, they say, I want to key the front of my subject. I want them to have light on their face. And I say, I empathize with that. I really want you to have your subject with light on their face. However, if we light too frontally on one of these things, our wall here, it has a slight curve to it. So that means these aren't curved panels. These are, it's like your second computer to monitor here. It's a rigid panel at an angle with a second rigid panel with a third rigid panel, so on and so forth. So if you shoot direct light at this thing, you'll see the lines, you'll see the individual panels, and all of the lighting principles change as soon as you are shooting on one of these, and they become, how can we keep this from looking like a wall? And it's been a big journey here. You could see it's not down right now, but at the top of this frame, there's a tease. This is setting up for an event, so we're not worried about immersion. But once we are, that tease comes down. It takes all the light off the wall. I think I have, you can see another, no. There. Yeah, I have another, you could see on the back here, we keep a ton of tubes. We throw on, I think some high powered, they're called FOSS panels in the back there. They really help just basically pouring light off the wall and shooting super bright. Like, you will pour light onto your sets because you want the wall to be as bright as possible, but then you need to balance that. So
Got it. And so the and the image that we're going to see on that LED wall is the one that is captured with that $400 Insta360 camera.
Right. I mean, look, there's stages, right? Like, that is the consumer friendly version of this.
Yeah.
They make, I would say, I have seen, you take, let's say, like, you take a $5,000 LiDAR scanner, right? You go out to your fake New York Street set, and you say, hey, let's LiDAR scan all of New York Street. And then you take a team to go and rebuild that in Unreal Engine. Because you can take a LiDAR scan, you could take a photogrammetry scan, and you could put that in the background, but that is not a real environment. And then once you start shooting light at things within Unreal, that won't reflect because there's no texture on that. So it's just basically a flat object. So you need to go back in and reconstruct. If you scan a scene and you truly want it to have dynamic lighting, that's why 360 video is the really nice, like, cheaper solution, because all of that is going to be built into a video, is the dynamic lighting of a real space. But if you want to capture that and sort of have it modular, it immediately becomes so much more difficult, because you need to recreate all of those textures. Because if I, am walking past a light post, I want that light post to reflect the light the way a light post does, So yeah, it can get very complicated. It just is a matter of, yeah, if you got $1,000 in rentals, I would say go for the 360.
Okay.
The other piece of this that I think I just want to share, because this is like where I nerd out. Like, this is my stuff that I really love. This technology is also rapidly advancing, like at a speed that's unseen. And there's two kind of new formidable entities in the space. One of them is called NERFs, which are, sorry everyone, neural radiance fields. And you can think about these things as another way to capture a 360 environment, but the way it does it utilizes another buzzword, machine learning. And it basically takes thousands of images, aligns them in 3D, and then projects them outward to points that also keep the lighting information and also the texture information. So we mentioned photogrammetry kind of a couple of times already. And photogrammetry is kind of like the oldest form of 3D capture. And the reason why we talk about 3D capture is because if you're delivering to a 3D engine that's being projected on a wall, you need things to be shown in the engine. And you can do that with 3D captures. So photogrammetry specifically has been something that's been around for a really long time, but it is the most simple version. So for example, like I have this big water bottle. I can turn this into 3D by taking 100 pictures of it. And instead of actually like going into a 3D program like a Maya or a Blender, I can use a program like Reality Capture or Agisoft and basically align all of these images and make a mesh out of it. And that mesh you can bring into an engine, but that mesh, the textural data isn't there, just because of the way that the images translate into 3D data. But with NERFs, you have that information. It's a very nascent technology, but is something that in the next 6 months could be really, really formidable, especially in a volume setting. Also, if anybody is looking for a research item, there's also something called a Gaussian splat, which is also a terrible name. But this is the beauty of researchers writing white papers, and we survive by trying to figure out new slang words for them. But Gaussian splats are essentially a similar way of using a NERF, but are very, very high def. They're being used to train computers to understand what objects are. So like if you took a 360 capture, you could use a Gaussian splat, and a Gaussian splat, you'd be able to point out like that's a stop sign, that's a squirrel, that's a blade of grass. It gets like very granular.
Yeah, and I think not to shell game everyone here with, yet another AI talk, but I think, you could see in the next 2 years how that kind of thing anything that is very procedural, it's good to think about that as something that might eventually get supplanted by AI, and going in and replacing textures by hand, pointing at a light post and saying that's a light post, pointing at a squirrel saying that's a squirrel. That's something I could easily see in the next couple of years, AI taking over and making these processes a lot quicker.
Okay. Mitch or Jake, was there any other kind of visual examples you wanted to show us?
Yeah, I got a few. So if you'll indulge me, I got a few.
Let's do it.
All right, cool. Let me get to this one. So this I kind of wanted to bring up as a slam dunk on the new Avatar. No, I think that so you saw, if you're familiar with these kinds of productions, at least on a very surface level, I think probably the thing that everyone that's involved with production has heard about these is that The Mandalorian was shot on one of these, and this was the first time that really this type of production was used, at these being XR volumes. And what basically like that set the gold standard, right? So they were shooting everything essentially in one room. They weren't on, Andor or whatever. They were very much like just looking around. And now you'll see in the second generation, everyone's been basically trying to recreate the space that they had. However, I would say that as you get further down the line here, you're going to see over the next couple years, I would say probably less convincing versions of it, because people take on a lot of the principles of it, but then you get things that come in like studios that really want everything to be just super flat lit. They don't really care about the immersive quality of it. They're just sort of like, get it done. This is supposed to be cheaper. Let's make it cheaper. So basically here is, you can see here, this is one of their volumes, and obviously it's incredibly complicated, but there is one shot in this opening sequence, that right there, that I wanted to highlight right here. So one thing that is super, super key, I mentioned earlier, is immersive lighting. Basically, I think it is like, as we've gotten closer to hours being used constantly for this, I think that what I've really noticed is that you want to do a thing that DPs, Harlan, I'm sure you're familiar, is called dirtying the frame. You want a lot of things going on. You want like stuff overhead. You want to be like walking through a forest where there's like a lot of objects that interact with the character and you're around. And you want, you know, like just things going on. Like indoor scenes really shine with this stuff. What doesn't tend to shine is wide open fields, because what happens in a wide open field is you don't get the quality of lighting that, you know, you're provided in a very unique space where you turn and all of a sudden your face is being lit up by a very incandescent lamp over here. So all of a sudden the side of my face is orange. In an open field, you get a character that turns and their hair light, which is the light coming back behind them, is still perfect. They turn over here, it's still perfect. It's still the same hair light. So then you start looking at the scene and you're not seeing the sort of subliminal things that your brain tells you, oh, I'm looking this direction now. Oh, I'm looking this direction. That mountain is over there for real. And I think that what happens a lot is when studios get very comfortable and start shooting things in open fields like this, what tends to happen is they revert just back to studio lighting, because they just say, I don't need image-based lighting here. It's a big, we set this thing as a big cloud coverage. So like the scene is an open field with cloud coverage. That's flat. That's completely flat lighting. It's just perfect hair light. It breaks your immersion. I promise if you watch this scene in the show, and after you've noticed this, you'll be like, yeah, that doesn't really look like a field, does it? And I think that was something that really stood out to me when I was watching this show, was just sort of just how quickly you're going to see sort of over the next 5 years, good and not so good versions of this, because everyone's got one of these now.
And I noticed like in that wide shot, so if there had been a couple of like trees in the foreground or something, like
Exactly.
that, you know, not yet.
Exactly. Yeah, you need just that one
helps.
little bit, yeah, to clue you in to say like maybe this is real. I think maybe this is real, right? And yeah, like you'll see one of the big things to notice is like that soft focus thing. Let's say I'm standing up and this is, you know, my igloo, and I'm standing in front of it right here, and I'm an inch off of this thing, but it's somehow soft focus and I am perfectly in focus. A lot of people watching at home, they're not cinematographers. They're not looking at this with a critical eye, but they're still thinking something's weird about that. I
Yeah.
don't usually see that, you know. There's usually this is not something about the rest of the scene isn't tracking with what I'm seeing right here. And with those foreground elements, you can have something practical, but there's also new texts coming out that are like AI generated foreground elements, which also do work. Like I would say, obviously not interactable, but you can generate things that go in front now of people in these scenes and say, hey, yeah, even if it's just a rock, you know, just to say like, there's other stuff in this field. You know?
So you're saying that you don't actually I mean, you could bring in the prop tree and put it in the foreground.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of,
or you can create that later
right.
in post.
Right. Exactly.
What's the better way? I guess the post is more expensive.
Right, exactly. I mean, that is ultimately the thing, right? Is like with all of these, you are the theory of it all is that you're recording all of this in camera. It's the Christopher Nolan school of volume shooting. You know, you're not going in post and you're playing with everything and saying, "Hey, I want to put a tree there." You're saying, we're already keyed out the background, man. Like we don't like I don't have a use for, you know, throwing an editor at this for 1,000 hours. We might as well bring something in and make it work in camera. Because then otherwise you'll be redoing all of the good hard work you did on set of tracking that movement of, you know, making sure that everything, all the lighting's matched and everything. Whereas, yeah, you could bring in, I always like to have it be practical. I think that's important. Like, let's say you have a row of park benches and then you have a character sit on a bench. If you can make the bench they sit on real and then the rest of them are fake, you'll say that bench is definitely real. The rest of them have to be.
But that's great. That's great.
Yeah. Car process, that's also a big thing here. People love shooting cars on stages because yeah, you get in a car and it's the classic old Hollywood thing is you just put a big, you project behind the car, this moving road, but like you get a car on a volume, you have a big enough volume to do that, and it just makes these things look amazing.
And so, for instance, in that shot that you showed us of the park earlier, it was kind of like a warm colored sky. And in that case, you would probably create like a warm backlight of some kind to match that. Would Can you, but let's say like the director, you're filming that scene on the stage, you have your plate up there.
Yep.
And the director's like, it's too warm and happy. I'm not feeling the
Right.
sadness of the scene.
All right. So if you're shooting with the 360 plate, that's a tough question to answer, right? Because you're going to have to do that with a practical light. If you have your background in an Unreal Engine environment, you can move the sun if you need to. All of that is really in your scene. And if you have lights that can communicate with Unreal Engine and say, hey, this, that like you recreate basically the scene, you create a sun that is in that scene, and then you have a lighting grid that is communicating with Unreal Engine, and it knows what light sources are behind you, and it's trying to emulate those light sources. Then you can just go into your Unreal Engine and you say, I actually don't like that there. Let's add a fake light, hide it off screen, put it over here, shoot that, wherever. And it's really easy. I've seen a few productions now where it's remarkable how quickly you can just once you're basically doing it in a post-production program, you just throw it in. And it's like and it's a whole different way of thinking, man, because as soon as you start to do that, you get a producer on set, you're like, I don't like that mountain, delete the mountain. It's gone. It's like it's silly. Like you get into it, you feel it like people get very like, oh, I would say it's dangerous almost how nitpicky people can get at that point, because then you're inviting in a lot of say on a lot of things that didn't used to be able to have a say on it. But yeah, you could definitely get very granular there.
Jake, any thoughts on that whole thing?
So for me, which is not so exciting, I don't think, for a lot of people, but I get really excited about the opportunities in commercial production, and the amount of actual ability you have, especially in e-commerce. Like if you're shooting a single product, we've shown you today a lot of things on big, expensive studio setups, but you right now can pretty easily, within reason, make your own kind of at-home volume studio if you have a TV. And if you also have something called a Vive tracker. In the world of VR, one of the things that came out of it that's amazing is a new way to track motion. And there's a company called HTC that basically sells these little pucks, and you can put one directly on top of your camera and it'll actually track the camera in space. So you'll get a very, very small tracked screen. And if you run an Unreal Engine, for example, in the background on that screen, you could have like 50 inches of trackable mat that you can use in any way that you want. So I've run many different productions in the last couple of years that have used like principles of this. Like we've had projectors shoot onto the back of sheets and do like very, very loose tracked camera movements. We usually try to keep them to abstract backgrounds because the tracking isn't amazingly perfect, but it gives you a lot more expression ability to actually express what you want in production design without having to have an amazing production designer. It's a huge benefit. And then the other piece of this puzzle is that this technology is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to actually utilize yourself. And I know for example, at Emerson already, like there's Vive trackers, there's all of these things that exist, and they're very, very easy to come by. The other thing I wanted to share was just kind of to put something to the name of photogrammetry. I have an example of what photogrammetry looks like. So stand by as I share my screen. So can I get a thumbs up? Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Cool. Okay, so there's a company called SciArc. They're one of the like most formidable people that are using photogrammetry for preservation. And they go across the world and scan these incredible environments. But as you can see, this environment has no sky. There's nothing there. There's nothing else. So it's almost like a set piece, and you can move around and you can see like all of the small details here. But what you also see as well is the lighting information baked into this scene. So right now, like right here, I think everybody can hopefully see my cursor. You can see a shadow from the wall. And that's because obviously when they were taking this scan, the sun was pointed over here and it cast a shadow on the ground. But because of this, when you put it into an Unreal Engine, that shadow doesn't go away. So that's where the work comes in. You actually have to go in and retexture this type of thing to make it a dynamic interface for 3D capture, or excuse me, for 2D capture. There's also things like check this out. And this is also kind of, to me, where it gets really exciting. Like anybody can kind of shoot anywhere with this technology. How often do you get a chance to shoot at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial without anybody in it? Although he is missing the top of his head. Prayers for him. But fundamentally, like the ability you get from these types of scans, you can kind of think it's limitless. You could have your talent kind of standing over here, and you can have the columns in the background. And if you have a really nice 3D scan of what the sky is supposed to look like, you won't have a gaping hole back here. But there's a lot of different things you can kind of utilize, and yeah.
So let me ask you two here. Like let's say I'm producing my indie low budget feature. I've got $200,000 to make the whole movie, and you know
I wish.
It all takes place in Boston, except the final scene is on a beach in the Caribbean, and you have our three characters on the beach having a conversation. Like how do we make that happen within our budget?
Yeah, I think I got a few ideas. Jake, I'm sure you got a few too. So Turbo Squid, first and foremost, that is a 3D library online. It is the gold standard library. Probably if you're looking for an environment that is specific, they'll have it. You go on there, you'll at least find some assets to build out your own thing. I would say that's also a thing here, is that if you're attempting any of these, you're in the multi-hyphenate space. I'm sorry. You're immediately going to have to learn Unreal. Sorry. So yeah, you'll probably, you'll get your assets, you'll cook up your beach environment, you'll start getting your props set, everything. But I think that is very achievable because it's pretty minimalist. You got your coconut tree that you can use for that object on the beach, and I'd say you could definitely do that pretty quickly. Water sims are tough. That's definitely a limitation of using a video game engine, is water simulation. But if you keep it a little bit back on the beach, I'd say you got a good shot.
Jake? And so if you have your character, okay, but you need to be on a stage that has the LED wall.
Right, exactly. No, yes, that would require a volume to shoot on for sure. I would say those run you like right now, 5 to 10K a day, depending, you know, 5K would be very, very cheap. You'd have to kind of know someone for that kind of rate. But so maybe more like 10 to 15. But like that's still that's coming with usually whatever, you know, stuff is locked into that studio. You'll get, you know, things that you'll probably have to worry about matching whatever you shot the rest of your film on in terms of camera. Some people don't like you bringing in your cameras to these spaces. They'll say whatever's on in our studio is what's in our studio. It's because any camera that's working on these, you have to get something like that puck going on the top of the camera in order to camera track everything, because Unreal needs to know where your camera is in order for it to, when you shift your camera, to shift the scene behind it in tandem with the camera. So yeah, I would say that there are always going to be limitations there, but let's say you gotta, I would say find a great DIT. That's the guy that at the end of the day is going to worry about your coloring and your lens distortions and all of that. If you get a good colorist, a good DIT, they can go in there and they can probably get your cameras to match, and that would probably be your biggest issue there.
And so do both of you like work at a place that is ever contacted by independent productions saying help?
Yeah, we work heavily with indies. But yeah, I mean it really is, it's you, every case is unique, right? It's sort of like every one of these spaces is a unicorn. Every, you know, all of the vendors come in, they build them to spec. Our space is unique because it's events and cinematic production. But there's also a million other ways that our place is unique, and that's the thing, is it gets very granular. I've seen ones where they actually, and this is this is where it kind of blows the back walls off of this thing. You can do this on a green screen. That is a crazy thing to think about. So there are actually cheaper spaces where you don't even need the volume, especially if you're using Unreal Engine. You need this thing called Ultimat. It is basically, it's a live keying device. It's pretty cheap, especially in comparison to, you know, the volume. And basically you could use that as a much better solution for that, especially if you have like a motion tracked character, you could do the whole thing virtually, right? So there's a million different ways that I've seen adapted. Yeah, Jake.
Yeah, this is where like the question always gets like fun and weird. And once again, it's kind of you can pressure test it to a situation or a scenario.
Mhm.
The big thing is like, could you shoot like a really tight version of your ocean scene on the beach on a TV screen behind you? 100%. As soon as you want to get wide, the cheapest option for most people will likely be a green screen studio.
Right.
That comes with its own set of complications, obviously. Like everybody's favorite thing to deal with is green screen spill, which sucks. And it's just a part of the shtick. But I think as I've said before, like the wonderful thing is that these spaces, these volumetric studios are going to become more and more accessible as time goes on. The true utilization and implications that they have for what we do on a day-to-day basis are massive. They're just one of those things that make these things easier for us. But right now, if I was advising an indie production on like the best ways to move forward, I would probably say like try your damn best to get on that beach.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
your budget is not looking too good for me. I think if you're working with something 200,000 plus, like you can probably make a justification for it, but like 50 to 100, 50 to 150, you're gonna have a rough time.
Yeah.
Good. That clears out. You know, I want to check in with everyone who's here and just see if there's any questions from our audience. You can either, I don't know, do they just put their questions in the chat, or can they actually turn on their cameras here?
I think they're supposed to put the questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, and then Harlan, if you click on the chat button, you should be able to see the questions that have been put. There's
Yeah.
actually one question here that says the benefits of reflected light on shiny objects like a car on a stage versus trying to recreate it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty inherent, right? The benefits of shiny objects like a car is like you got the shine the first time you got it. There's nothing better than the real thing with all of these, right? Like at the end of the day, you are always trying to simulate reality. So I think car production has actually been the earliest and most common adoption of these spaces. So I am sure there are a million well-skinned car models online with perfect reflections. So if you're shooting light at a perfectly constructed car model, it'll get you what you need for sure. Jake? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is the case. I think you bring a car into studio, you can get the reflections actively. The other option rather is like a car in a green screen studio, and you have to recreate the reflections. Clearly, that is not it's not my recommendation. Uh, Metallic objects in green spaces come with a lot of issues, and if you're able to actually just have practical lighting or stimulated lighting from screens that are kind of truly creating that environment that you're looking for, it is clearly the winner in most cases.
Yep. There is actually one thing I want to share too. Oh, we got another one. All right. What steps should we take?
This is from Joe Burke.
Okay. What steps should we take if we want to start working in this space, i.e., working on a volume stage or operating Unreal Engine? So, if you want to work in this environment, I would say the first thing is it's like coding was 10 years ago, I would say is like the quickest equivalent. Learn Unreal. Learn 3D environment programming, learn sort of keyframing within those environments. This is closest to practical stage production. So if you know lighting grids well, if you know like routing well, engineering stuff, all of this is very useful information for that. A lot of people for these spaces, they're looking for frankly multi-hyphenates. A lot of job titles get very strange in these spaces. So it really behooves you to have a few, things a few skill sets under your belt that you can pitch. But also it's, demo reels, like Jake was saying, if you show a proficiency with limited resources in any of this, people are very like, there's a lot of these spaces where people are looking for talent actively. So if there's someone that could, like, especially young people want to take a chance. They're saying, like I've been shooting practical production for 40 years. I bring in a lot of DPs to our space. They look at the wall, they say, dude, I'm out. I'm good. I don't want this. Like I need a real actor. I need a real scene. I need a real everything. And I find a lot of younger people that are, they're new to this. They're willing to learn from the ground up. If you're willing to do that, there are a lot of places. And I know, I'm pretty sure, Harlan, I don't, is Emerson building one of these? I heard that there might be one of these in production. So if there's one of these at Emerson, get in that room.
It's small, but it
Okay.
is it's like 8 feet. It's like 10 feet by 8 feet.
Ours is, I'll tell you this, our full-scale production studio volume is 20 to 25 feet long. We have about 70 to 90 degrees FOV. If you could get good on that, you got it. You're fine. Like there's a lot of these. It's not scale, I mean, it is scalable. Like all of these skills, they very much apply one for one to everything you're doing. There's no version of this that is like the baby version.
Great.
And from an Unreal side, there's my favorite thing. Like it's funny because we're talking about it from a college perspective, but YouTube University is a super helpful place to pull from. And I think there's a channel specifically that comes to mind. It's Corridor Crew. They're like on the cutting edge of doing all of these things for as cheap as physically possible. And they're pushing the limits on every single thing that they do on a daily basis. So honestly, when we say like get into Unreal, like if you have any basic 3D understanding, Unreal should be pretty simple. The thing that gets complicated on Unreal is when you start incorporating things like logic, which is like when you live in the real world, you don't really think about the logic of the real world, but like when you drop something, it falls. When time passes, the light changes, and those are things that are parameters in Unreal that you're able to change and control, and that's where complexity comes in. So when Harlan brought up before, like the ocean scene on the beach, like there, think about all of the different pieces of logic that go into that scene. Like there's sand, there's wind, maybe. Does the wind push the sand? Do the waves go farther up the beach as time goes on? Those are the things that you can kind of really like tap into with an engine like Unreal. And also, has to be said, Unreal is only one type of engine. There's many of them.
Yeah.
Right now, definitely, I would say like the way that Avid had a vice grip on editing, Unreal has kind of a vice grip on
Yeah.
volume projection.
But they just changed their pricing model though, so we could see a huge shift in the next couple of years. I think they changed it from basically a free program to like $2,000 per license, which is like, there's a lot of people that aren't going to want to pay that.
But I think that's only if you're a part of a business that's making a certain amount of money, right?
Right. Yeah. If you're an independent dev, if you're going at this, yeah, ground up. Also, yeah, I would say like if you're in school with this kind of, I see Corey's question here. What do you wish was provided to you at Emerson? What schools what schools such as Emerson start training students on these fast moving technologies? I'd say like Jake, like the most utility I have ever gotten out of learning a very, very specific skill within these, because once you get into these pathways, these are not like well-trodden pathways. You are going down a super niche route of production. You're best off, honestly, going to YouTube, searching your specific question, and finding that 2,000 views video of just a guy with too much time on his hands going through every step and following that step for step, learning what you got to learn. Because you can, like a lot of these things, you can go through a course, but what I find personally helpful and what I find like is really beneficial to your personal learning process is coming up with the intelligence to know what your question should be and seeking out the answer to that question. Because you could take a class, a lot of these Unreal classes are going to be ground up Unreal basics. They're going to show you how to set up a scene, which is great. Take one of those classes. But once you're beyond that, get specific. How do I accomplish the goal I want? These are huge, huge, huge programs. So you are better off honing in and being like, I have an end state I want to achieve. What are the 5 steps I need to do to get there, and searching for the individual answers to that question and seeing if you can execute it. During school, what I wish I could have done more of is understanding that once I got out of school, all of my parameters are controlled by things like budget, like time, like other people's wants and needs for my project, what they need to get out of this thing. I don't have time on these projects to go and think about what I want to accomplish because I am serving someone else's interest. So what I would say is in school, if you are trying try something weird, man. Try to get to the get things done that people won't bother to do in a practical environment where things like burning money are, not really feasible options. Like really think about it from a standpoint of like, all right, like this is, what's the annoying thing to do here and how can I do it?
One thing I just wanted to ask you there is, so like Mitch, I'm looking at your Zoom frame here,
Yeah.
and like you have this lamp and a little
Yeah.
green foliage back there in the background.
Yeah.
If we were doing it, let's say that was an LED screen behind you.
Right. It is.
And and we wanted to do like a moving shot, right?
Right.
That goes from maybe like a frontal to a profile.
Right.
and now what I'm seeing is like more of that picture frame behind you, behind the lamp. It's like, that gets revealed. And
Yes.
and I understand how you could construct that in a virtual world.
Mhm.
But what if you're doing the photograph, if you're filming something,
Mhm.
how do you see around the lamp?
Right. You aren't going to, so that's called parallax. And you will not get parallax with a video plate unless you've planned for it, right? So you like something me and Jake both learned in Dan's class is one of the key principles of VR is once you're in VR, you are an object in a room, and that is the storytelling perspective that you have. You are fundamentally an immovable part of a 3D space. So if you have a planned move, I would say you could achieve that still in the poor man's way of saying, let's say we put that on a slider, we get your 360 camera, we put it on a slider, we make that move, we match that move later on,
On the
whatever.
stage.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that would give you that parallax with that plate. However, obviously once you're getting in those complications, the modularity, that's when you have to consider, the Unreal aspect of this. But if you can achieve that, you've just saved tens of thousands of dollars. Congratulations.
Got it. Let me just check in and see if there's any more questions.
Oh, cool.
There is one question in the chat and it's from Joe. So it's, do you know of any specific companies that may be good to reach out to, like offering these kinds of jobs? And I think this one says, ideally in LA, but it kind of begs the question, are there any for some of these technologies, some of these companies, are they based in any particular geographic area? Are they pretty spread out? Is there a hub for these kinds of things that people should be gravitating towards?
Uh, I mean, what it's the hub of production's where production happens. It's LA, it's New York, it's Atlanta. At this point, a lot of the times people, build these things around where talent can get to and where every crew can get to. It's the same. Something to keep in mind is that these are functionally, a lot of these at a higher level are traditional sets. They're just moved into a more practical environment. So like in the same way, these are unfortunately, I would say to that, like, yes, one, you can like learn these things and become a much more attractive candidate for these kind of things, but they still do follow a lot of the traditional, aspects of production where you do need to develop your reel, your ability. I'd say this is general career advice for anyone that's coming out of a program, but it's the entertainment industry. There's really not a lot of people aren't leaving these opportunities hanging out in the open. You have to go and you got to seek them out yourself. Uh, Generally speaking, Emerson, amazing alumni network. Reach out to Emerson grads. I would say probably my best luck in that has been reaching out to people that are at least, I would say, 10 years older than you when you graduate, because the people around you when you graduate, they're going to be looking for their own opportunities. They're not going to have the ladder to send down to you. Find some people, in their 40s, people that, probably are settled into something that have the ability to probably, bring you up a little bit, talk to you a little bit, bring down that ladder for you if they can. But yeah, I'd say that's my general. When I was watching one of these, that's kind of what I wish someone had told me, because I was reaching out to friends and they were like, "I got my own thing, man. I don't have something that I could just hand to you right now." So
I think from my perspective, I hate being constrained to structures that exist in the world, and like Mitch knows this about me generally. Like, um, if if I want something, like it's what I do, and the way that I found my first ins, specifically in like 3D and volumetric and like the weird mixed reality world, was going to events. There are a ton of expos talking about these
NEB.
stuff.
Big
Yeah,
one.
like NAB is really, really big, but in LA, if you ever have a chance to be out there, like they have like weeks of these events of all sorts, and you're not necessarily looking to go to an event that has like exhibitions attached to it. You're looking for an event where vendors are there. So there, like I met a company called 3D Wall. They were one of the first people that was building these volumetric screens out on. They did the Sony lot. And when I met them, they were like two guys, like just like trying to sell their idea at an expo. And like we kept in touch over the years, and like now we're a little bit out of touch, but we're connected on LinkedIn, I'll tell you. So fundamentally, to me, I think the biggest opportunity for individuals that have the interest is to, one, grab onto what you can, learn everything you can specifically about Unreal or camera tracking, or compositing. Like those skill sets are directly translatable in almost any of these roles or in worlds. It's kind of like you're acquiring the language to have the conversation. And then from there, go to the place where people are. And in that way, these are like expos, these are tech places. Like some of it is kind of a little insufferable, sorry, but like it just is what it is. A lot of them, a lot of these places have people that you would never be able to speak to normally. And if you're able to get out of your comfort zone and talk to individuals that are like, that will probably be your boss, like you're going to be in a much better spot.
Yeah. I'd also say, kind of addition to that, like it's the classic thing. Everyone wants to be a director. That's sexy, you know, everyone wants the coolest top job position. If you specialize in one of these fields, if you are very specific about a niche and you're looking at this and you're saying, I have a really good handle on image-based lighting, follow that, you know, get really good at that. Even if you still want to do the other thing, meet people with that pretext, you know, and say like, I'm really good at this. And people want people that have niche specialties in this, because there are a lot of multi-hyphenates, but there aren't a lot of people that are like just the best at one thing in these categories, because all of this is coming up at the same time. It's been 2 years essentially of this stuff being really accessible. Like same with AI. If you hear a guy saying he knows everything, he is lying to you. Like these are truly brand new spaces. You have an edge. I've met people of all ages working on these things. And honestly, a lot of the very unique vendors we work with, people that do very niche, who have carved out very niche parts of this industry, they're young. They're very young people. There's this one guy, Preview. He LiDAR scans environments and recreates Unreal, like I mentioned before. He has done all of the London theaters. He branched that out into every theater, basically everywhere. He scanned all of the Washington monuments, and he is now working for studio lots, scanning all studio lots and creating these Unreal sets for them. So it's like, it's truly like you can blow up very quickly in this stuff, especially if you specialize.
Harlan, can I jump in and ask a question too, or make a point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to mention too that this is not a technology too that's limited to the American market. And I mean, I know that from firsthand experience. I mean, I know of stages specifically in London and Amsterdam. This technology was at a recent conference I was at in Rome, and of course, everybody was interested in the capabilities of it. And then it's funny you're talking about photogrammetry, because just today I'm in Zurich and I went to the museum and they had done a photogrammetry LiDAR scan of the entire train station, all the levels, all of the hidden service passageways, everything in this entire train station. So, I mean, the technology is everywhere, as well as the opportunities. If people are in different geographical markets, fantastic. You can pursue this type of opportunity anywhere in the world, because it is everywhere.
Yeah, our vendors are we got vendors in Croatia. We got vendors are in like Luxembourg. We got vendors like all across everywhere. All these companies specialize everywhere. Definitely. Absolutely.
Hey, Mitch and Jake. So in theory, not in the fall semester, but in the following spring semester, we will be having a class on Unreal Engine and working with this technology with the new wall. What do you think? Like, what are the 5 or 6 things that a student should know just to get into the room and have a good conversation about it? Like, what should they learn in that semester?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, prep your project. You got like you can you can have something ready the day you walk in Unreal. It's super cheap point of entry. You can all you need is a computer really to start building these skills. And from there, I would say, yeah, like what you should be teaching. I'd say like, basic sort of like those tiers, right? Like there's tiers of production with all of this. There's a cheaper version, there's a more expensive version, there's a time intensive version and a less time intensive version. They are very, very modular. I would say, yeah, that I have a few points. Let me think on that. Jake, do you have some
Yeah, I think prerequisite activities need to occur for sure.
Yeah.
And the biggest one is like you need to know how to use a camera. That is the number one piece here. And once you know how to do that, like you need to immediately go into 3D tracking, understanding how 3D tracking works. Because that's what kind of gives you the parallax magic of being on a wall. Otherwise, it's being in front of essentially a colored seamless that changes scenes. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to create worlds and environments and experiences with immersion. The next piece is like really getting familiar with lighting. I think lighting here is also that thing that like will turn something from to like, whoa, like I don't even know how you did that. And as we said earlier in this conversation, these things are fairly unattainable for someone unless you have a large budget. So fundamentally, having even a 10 foot screen behind you, you can really do a lot. So once you go through like tracking, lighting, I think Unreal setup, stage design, environment design is probably the next thing. Because with those 3 things, you can kind of shoot anything. Like you're kind of ready to go. You can get a little bit weird. Like you can go into other places and you can explore like creating HDRIs, which are those 360 images that we keep talking about. But that's not necessarily something that's required to do the thing. So yeah, I think that as long as you know how to use a camera, you have a practical understanding of lighting, and then you learn how to do camera tracking and environment design, like you're ready to use that type of wall. And what there was a question asked earlier, which is like, what would I wish for if I did Emerson again in that way? And honestly, it's just like having more time to shoot small practical experiments. And if you have a wall that's ready to go and flexible, I would just be like on that thing every single day, every single second that I could be, because that's really how you learn and explore these types of things.
Yeah, usually free on the weekends. And definitely, practical production, man. Like so much of this practically translates. And if you're good at practical production first, then you can, because a lot of this, you're taking a practical production skill set and then you are modifying that for these environments. So if you're really, really good at 3-point lighting setups, you will know how to adapt that with an added complication, which this really is. It's mostly you take a traditional setting and then you say, here's one really crazy element. Let's see how you adapt to that. And like, there's a lot of principles that you can learn there. I know like I could go forever about lighting one of these things because that is a whole thing in itself. And if you're really, really good at stage lighting, you'll have a much easier time.
And to answer Harlan, to answer your new question here,
Yeah.
I would definitely say both of these things are a career in themselves, but with language that translates to other pathways. I think the key here is that this is not something that can be stopped by obsolescence. Like I don't see a world where the skills you pick up in either of these fields in virtual production or even in creating for augmented reality or virtual reality, I don't think those skills are not going to go away. there's a lot of power in learning in my personal practice. Like for AR commercially, there's so much room to like explore with clients. Like every single package, like if you ever see something in a store, they can be augmented by AR, and that is just unsubstantiated real estate. Like people are not taking that into account. So if you're someone that has these skills, um, it can definitely be a career. It's just kind of also requires that base level of entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah, definitely that. Like, I think, a great place to start that I see a lot of people starting when they're involving with like 3D, programs is things like TikTok filters. Like that is one of the biggest, like, first things that I think of when I think of like LiDAR. Like every phone now has LiDAR on it, figuring out ways to use kind of what you have and growing your portfolio and your skill set and sort of virtual production in AR. Like it is a skill set. There's a toolkit and it is adapting. That is the thing, is like you need to develop that basic toolkit. The end, product that you're serving with that is definitely going to change. This is not, TikTok's gonna get banned, whatever in 5 minutes. So like you better have that toolkit ready to port over to whatever, comes next. And that's the thing, is really, it is absolutely just the same principles. I could guarantee you that the engine that runs, TikTok will run the next thing, and so on and so forth. So if you have like a really solid skill set in those things, you'll be working you probably would be more solid than most people with traditional production roles if you have like a really solid skill set here, because people get excited about these things, and especially when it's shiny and new like this, like everyone wants their demo. Every company wants to prove how they are using AR to make their stuff better. And if you can be the guy that comes in and says, hey, I got a really cool idea for your product displays. And I had a clothing brand really briefly, and we basically would take scans of everything, and like it was just like this really easy thing where you could hover over a product and spin it in the store, and it just made this like much more interactive element. And I'm sure we could have gone ahead and just sold that feature off to a million different brands, because everyone wants just to spin an object in their store, and that's the kind of thing that you could definitely do. You could hone in and just do that if you wanted. It really, the sky's the limit.
All right. Let's see. We're getting close to the end of our session here. Dan or Corey or Harlan, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I wanted to, first off, thank obviously Mitch and Jake for, kind of shining a light here on this whole new branch of production that's opening up. I'm sure anybody can see the practicality of this. It might not be the cheap way to do stuff now, but as they're saying, we're not talking about a decade off or 5 years off, or maybe even 2 years. We're in the next year or two, it becomes more and more accessible as an alternative against green screen or location shooting. And to be able to, do all kind of one-stop shopping for your production is going to become the most efficient way to actually do this. So this is a kind of a big change that'll come around in the production industry. Thanks a lot for sharing all that insight today, guys. I appreciate it. And Harold, any last stuff you want to add?
No, this was very, very informative. Working as a writer director, I don't know anything about this, and it was great to hear a bit about it. And I hope that it was informative for our students. And it seems like a really exciting future for filmmaking in a really broad sense of the term. So thank you very much, Mitch, Jake, and Harlan as well for moderating. Daniel, do you want to make maybe some closing remarks or?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that obviously, the global BFA in Film Art, which was sponsoring this, we have students that think like auteurs. They're actually, very open-minded about all the different tool sets that they have to make motion media with. So I think getting into eventually some more hands-on with this, like you said, spending some time on Unreal, even on their own. These are the kinds of students that would be. Anybody watching this too has probably had their interest piqued. So I think just on behalf of that, I'd say, Mitch, Jake, any last words before we call it a day here in the office?
I'd say you could pick it up tomorrow, you know, have fun with it, you know, don't put too much pressure on it. These are developing things, right? Like if you get into this and it's not for you, don't worry about it, because there's a million different angles of it. You can figure it out, I'm sure. And yeah, I just thank you guys for having me today. I appreciate it, and excited to see what becomes of this Emerson XR thing. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you as well. If there's one thing that I can add for everyone, I would say do not feel afraid to reach out to individuals that are doing the thing that you think you want to do. When I was at Emerson, one of the things that I was able to do was find people that were doing LiDAR scanning, which was like, it was like the baby version of what it is today. And the people that own the processes behind the process of like actually doing the work were so willing to talk to me about how these things can happen and how you can do it yourself. So I extend that to anyone here. I'm very accessible, Jake Block, on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Hopefully one of my like weird rants triggered something positive for everyone here. But thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure.
Jake and Mitch, great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you very much too, Harlan, for all the questions and for your part in it too. All right, well, I think that's it then. So, Corey, thank you very much too for working behind the scenes and on behalf of the industry talks for the GBFA program. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.